Thank you so much, President Grimson, for that very kind introduction. I refer to myself as a student of the Arctic, not an expert, because I don't think, as much as anyone can ever know, you will know enough to be able to fully comprehend the complexities of this very special place that is both valuable and vulnerable to those who live there, but also to the world. My purpose here today is to do three things. Number one, reflect briefly upon the importance of the Arctic Council and the contribution it's made not only to the region, but to the world. Secondly, to talk about the importance of research to the U.S. Arctic Council Chairmanship, which will begin next spring. And finally, to offer an invitation to all of you for suggestions and involvement in the upcoming U.S. chairmanship. But before I do that, I just want to personally thank both Alice Rogoff and President Grimson for their leadership and their vision in seeing the Arctic Council as the important thing to both begin and end this meeting with, because it is indeed a powerful institution, one that is becoming stronger every year. And I want to thank President Grimson for all his organizational work in bringing the Arctic Circle to fruition. I think many of you were here last year, as I was, and impressed by how successful a first year was and how that has grown this year. But it really is broader than just those of us who are here experiencing this. It is something that I believe is sending waves to the rest of the world, waves of information, waves of inspiration, and waves of invitation to learn more about this place and to become increasingly knowledgeable about it and involved in understanding it in a way that really benefits not only the region, but the world. So thank you, President Grimson. Thank you to your very competent staff that has organized this effort. It is indeed impressive. And the fact that so many people are still here after 3 days of very serious, thoughtful, and impressive presentations is really quite remarkable. So, as you heard this morning before lunch from a group of Alaskans who spoke to this issue of the importance of the Arctic region to the United States, thanks to the fact that Alaska is a part of the United States, we have a lot of interest in and commitment to doing our most to really make this a successful effort. And as a 40-year-long Alaskan myself, I'm happy to help be a bridge to the people of not only our great state, but to other regions, and hope to be able to do that. I want to say that, as I mentioned, the Arctic Council is very special. And when the United States had the privilege of chairing the Arctic Council many years ago, I at that time was Lieutenant Governor and was the state's representative to the Arctic Council process. It was a much smaller, much simpler, much greener, in the sense that our principal focus was protecting the environment of the Arctic and some work on sustainable development. But as time has gone by, not only has it grown in its capacity to address a whole host of issues, but has it increasingly focused on the needs of the people of the Arctic and an understanding that sustainable development that evolves in a way that really benefits the people of the Arctic must be a core value. The involvement of permanent participants and the expanding list of people and organizations and non-Arctic nations that are now very important observers will continue to contribute to the value of the Council. As you all know, there have been recent agreements, particularly with regard to search and rescue and responding to oil spills, but there has been a wealth of information presented over the years thanks to the work of the 6 working groups. And they are based on a couple of key values: the importance of scientific research, the importance of collaborating across national borders, the importance of listening to people to understand more fully what the implications of this research might be in the region, and a sense that by producing these reports, not only the nations that are of the Arctic, but of the world, will benefit from the information that is provided to them. And you just heard a great description of a CAF report, a more recent publication that I think has profound implications as we think about our global responsibilities. Emergency prevention and preparedness of response, the work that was done there was unquestionably important, very, very valuable in producing the agreement that the Arctic Council moved forward. And similarly, the work done by PAIM and the protection of the marine environment, which positioned the countries to be able to take the next steps in adopting the agreement. Now, the US will chair beginning next April. And I just want to emphasize that we see the three principal areas that have been identified: addressing climate change, Arctic Ocean stewardship, and improving the economic living conditions in the Arctic, as building upon prior work. The Norwegian chairmanship that emphasized climate change, the Canadian chairmanship, which has emphasized the importance of including and focusing on the needs of the people of the Arctic. The US chairmanship is building on that history, a very rich contribution that has been made over the many years. One Arctic shared opportunities, challenges, and responsibilities really envisions this notion that, yes, there are many Arctics, but there is one Arctic, that we all have a key and lasting commitment to making certain that it is as healthy tomorrow as it is today, and we all have a role to play in doing that. So, the portion of our agenda that addresses climate change does rely heavily on research and work that has already been done by the Arctic Council, but needs to be taken to another level. Unquestionably, adaptation and resilience is the thing that you hear most often if you go to the communities of the Arctic that are already facing some rather dramatic change as a result of climate warming, ice retreat, and thawing permafrost. So concentrating on the one hand, the things that we might do to reduce the rate of climate change, like short-lived climate pollutants, black carbon, et cetera, but also focusing on working with those communities that are at the front lines and are having to make dramatic changes as a result of what they are experiencing. Obviously, science has an important way of contributing to this work. Stewardship of the Arctic Ocean, again, this builds on much work that has been done by the Arctic Council over the years and its many working groups, and taking that to the next level, particularly looking at things like marine protected areas. There are many places in the world that have already identified marine protected areas. There has been discussion about and work on the notion that a marine protected area doesn't mean the same thing in every place. It can mean very different things depending upon what the needs are and what the built-up science and consensus of the region is. More discussion about that obviously will be necessary. Admiral Papp is particularly interested in the search and rescue exercises, as I think we all are, understanding the dramatic challenges associated with doing business in the Arctic. Actually exercising our ability to respond, whether it's search and rescue or oil spill response, is a very important thing for us to put resources, time, and energy into if we are going to fulfill our responsibilities as stewards of this very special place. Improving the economic and living conditions of the people of the Arctic, again, building on the Canadian chairmanship, is very important to the United States, very important to the people who live in Alaska, and another way in which the work that has been done at the Arctic Council table, but also the way in which science and research can contribute to answering some of the really difficult challenges of this region, particularly things like renewable energy, which we've already heard a fair amount of discussion about this afternoon. Microgrids and the extent to which new technology that marries old technology with new technology in scale-appropriate ways is something that we believe we can make a considerable contribution to, not just in the Arctic region, but actually, as we heard from the gentleman from India, talking about the challenges of small-scale electricity development and distribution. I think there are lessons that can be learned in the Arctic that can be transferable to other places. A number of things that are listed are ideas that we have that we can build upon work that has been done and needs to be taken to another level. I want to specifically mention suicide prevention and resilience of communities, because I know that this is an area of tremendous concern throughout the Arctic region. It is something that in Alaska we have talked about, researched, puzzled about. I don't believe that there is one solution to this problem. What I do believe is that it would benefit from additional conversation among the providers, among the community leaders, among the experts in mental health and resilience, that we might be able to improve some of those aspects of life in the North that create a tremendous sadness in our lives. I want to speak a little more about the renewable energy concept. You know, we've heard today that there are a lot of traditional energy delivery systems that simply won't work at a place where you have very small communities that are separated by great distances. That doesn't mean that we should be satisfied with continuing to use diesel. Diesel that is not only very expensive, but that pollutes, and that is really yesterday's technology. So we'll be putting a heavy emphasis, thanks to some resources not only from the United States federal government, the University of Alaska Fairbanks that has done work in this area, but literally partnering with the many other countries, not only in the Arctic, but elsewhere, that see this as a problem where we can really make some progress. Things like community health and well-being, because of the availability of fresh water and adequate sanitation systems, this is not a problem throughout the Arctic, but there are many places in the Arctic where it is. And I'm sorry to say that in many Alaska villages, it remains an unsolved problem. This, too, could benefit not only from research and development, sharing of ideas about what is working in other places, but again, might provide the kind of technology that would actually be useful to other places in the world that similarly have small, highly distributed communities that really can't solve these problems in the old 20th century way. So we also believe that this is an area not only where research can benefit the people of the Arctic, but where those technologies can benefit the rest of the world. I mentioned adaptation and resilience a moment ago because, again, if you look at the examples that exist today, not tomorrow, but today in Alaska, communities like Kivalina and Shishmaref and Nutok, and over 24 other communities that have been identified by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as needing to be moved because of thawing permafrost, because of coastal erosion, because of systems that are breaking down because of the rapid rate of climate change and its impact on these communities. Changing the way in which we do planning, engineering, and construction in communities that are experiencing this rapid rate of change requires us to do things very differently, including, I might add, educating the next generation of engineers. These are problems that really are very, very broad. They're not only how do we solve today's problems, but how do we build a system of thinking about how much we cannot rely on today as a guide for tomorrow. You know, engineers and planners, you know, they have to certify that what it is that they're building actually will work. And our common model for doing that is to assume, based on the experience of the past, that constructing things today can be done more or less as we've done them in the past. Well, we know that today doesn't look anything like yesterday in the Arctic, and we know that tomorrow isn't going to look anything like today. So this requires a rather large shift in thinking about decisions, investments, engineering, construction, doing business at all levels in a very different way. And I am hopeful that a combination of not only research, but also education and community dialogue can enable us to get to where we need to go. I know I'm just about out of time, so let me just say that some of the other ideas that have been put on the table as possibilities under the U.S. chairmanship, again, look to some of the things that have been done in other regions so that we can ask the question whether some of these things might make sense as a new way of doing business in the Arctic. The regional seas idea might envision, for example, a new way of coordinating some of the research, some of the observation that we've heard a lot of people talking about, how much we need to really synthesize the observing networks across the Arctic. Perhaps there are ways that organizations like a regional seas program that focuses on the coordination of Arctic observing systems might take us beyond where we are today. Finally, I just want to mention, as I briefly did this morning, that the Arctic Council has had a task force that has focused on scientific cooperation and is very close to language that could be adopted as either a voluntary or binding agreement. Discussions continue on that point. But I just might note that I think this represents taking the Arctic Council to another level that will really benefit all of the people of the Arctic, but all of the people in this room and beyond who don't call the Arctic home, but that are very, very interested in making sure that it is not only that the research is relevant and timely, but that it benefits decision makers, whether they're in the public or the private sector, to make better choices about the future. In closing, as the President mentioned, I chair the Arctic Research Commission. I want to refer you to commission work that has been done that may be helpful to you, and particularly refer you to our website, arctic.gov, which is where you will find materials that we have provided over the years to the research community since we were created back in the 1980s. And if you want to have a daily electronic newsletter that will tell you about everything that's going on in the Arctic, you can sign up for the daily update. So in closing, again, I want to thank not only President Grimson and Alice Rogoff for their leadership in the vision that gave birth to the Arctic Circle. I want to particularly thank President Grimson for being an Arctic ambassador to the world. He has taken on as his personal mission focusing the attention of people throughout the world on the Arctic, why it matters, what happens in the Arctic is important to people who live far away from the Arctic. I want to challenge each and every one of you today to become more like President Grimson. I want you all to leave here as Arctic ambassadors. I want you to think about sharing wherever you call home, when you get back home, some of what you have learned with your family, with your business and industry colleagues at your universities, that you might talk about the many challenges, the many opportunities, the many responsibilities that we all share in making certain that the future of the Arctic is a bright, safe, responsible, and sustainable one. So in closing, again, thank you all for not only participating, but for taking on the charge, the challenge of being an Arctic ambassador. Thank you very much.